So let's create a seamless texture in Affinity Photo. And to do this, you can go about it in several ways, but the main thing to keep in mind is you'll need a 1-to-1 ratio crop. And it's best to use a texture that's not so pattern-like. Ideally, if we could repeat a pattern in Affinity Photo, it would be great, but it doesn't quite work like other tools you might be used to, like Photoshop or Illustrator. Maybe that's a feature that will come. I'm excited to see it. If so, why don't we dive in and first crop this photo to the right ratio that we're after. So you can go into the crop mode by clicking the icon here on the left, and then going into the mode itself and hit 1-to-1. And this will give us a perfect square of a crop, and you can just shuffle this around in the photo that you're going to crop any which place you prefer. Maybe we'll just use the top left corner and go ahead and hit apply. Great. So from this point forward, we can go ahead and use a nice built-in filter called affine in Affinity Photo. So if we go to filters, distort, and then go down to affine. And the trick here is to offset the X and Y axis 50% to start with. And then we'll come back after we do some touch-ups to this texture, and we'll come back and make that a negative percentage just to kind of resolve it back to the original state. So that'll make more sense as I show you. So we're going to basically divide this into quarters as I enter in 50%, and you'll see it turn into 4 different squares, and that's what we want. So I'll go ahead and hit apply, and we'll be set to go. I'll unlock that background layer so we can manipulate it. And what I want to do is just use our clone stamp tool to do a bunch of the dirty work for us in terms of making these seams that we see disappear. So I'm going to option click on the keyboard, and just kind of, you can see a real live preview as you hover over the actual line in the photo. If you just start brushing out that line, trying to make that seam disappear is what we're after. I have my hardness all the way down and the opacity all the way up. You can even turn down the opacity just to kind of make that less harsh as you're painting this. So maybe I'll go to 80 and hardness at 0. So let's just kind of touch up these seams that we see. You'll have to resample, continuously resample as you go. So just keep that in mind if you're hitting option and click. And then we'll just work our way down. So this part of the photo is definitely darker. We can go and maybe make the light shade come down to the dark shade, just kind of drift those in together as best we can. So maybe even make the brush pretty massive for that, just so it's a little more natural. Okay, so you can still see that there's basically where your trained eye would see the paint strokes here, that those still represent those seams that we're trying to get rid of. We can kind of deal with that with some actual edits to the photo itself. So maybe some levels or something like that, just to bring out the contrast in the photo, like the darks and the lights. You can even do a hide pass filter to make this really punchy. So let's go to sharpen and high pass and increase that a bit. We actually need to create a new layer first, so I'll do it this way. High pass filter. It should create its own mask. We want to bring that on top of this layer here, and then increase that radius a bit, like 3 pixels or so. And then what we'll want to do is use a blend mode to bring out this, and I think linear light is the best one to use. You can adjust that amount that comes through with the opacity meter, so maybe 75% looks okay to me. So without that, we're stuck with, not stuck with, but we have this look, and then with we have this look. So it's a little more contrast. At this point we have our cropped version, but unfortunately it's still just resized the canvas. We actually need to rasterize this photo so it meets that portion in the actual cropping area. So we want it to actually abide by that. So let's go ahead and rasterize it down, and it should go ahead and do that trick. So you see the outer handles are now to that square prop. Great, so at this point we can do that affine filter again. So I'll go and do distort, affine, and we'll go back to negative 50% at this point. And you could see a little bit of issues there in the middle, but it's not so much that I would bark at it. So at this point, you could go in and maybe touch that up a little more with the clone tool, maybe. So we could just do once more there. And that should make this a seamless pattern. It's a trial and error, I would say, with any pattern you choose. So make sure if it is one that can be repeatable, it's going to be obvious, like something like this, like stone or just a sand look or something like that, kind of grungy look. This works the best for. So definitely check that out. Try it on your own projects and see what you can come up with to make a really seamless pattern. You might use this on, say, a background image of a website or some sort of print that you're looking to scale up and height and width that the original photo wasn't big enough for. So something like that, maybe. It's kind of endless in possibilities.